Intro. London has a way of remembering you. So do the places you thought you left behind. Detective Inspector Alistair Finch has learned that the past doesn't stay buried. It waits. In the quiet towns, the empty streets, and the cold spaces between people who never said goodbye. This is a story about return. And what comes back with you? Episode 9. Cold Return. Some places never let you leave. Part 1. The body on the pier. The sea was low and sullen, dragged back from the shore as if it had decided it had seen enough. Detective Inspector Alistair Finch stood at the edge of the pier with his hands in the pockets of his trench coat, collar turned up against a wind that carried more salt than warmth. The boards beneath his shoes creaked softly, a tired sound, like the pier itself was old enough to complain. Gulls wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and accusing, echoing off shuttered arcades and locked amusements that had not welcomed a paying customer in years. The body lay inside what had once been called Neptune's Kingdom, a faded attraction halfway down the pier, its sign peeling, letters missing. Someone had once painted smiling mermaids on the front. Now they stared with cracked eyes through flaking blue paint. "Found him just after 6, said the local constable, a young man who smelled faintly of instant coffee and nervousness. Cleaner came through. Thought he was asleep at first. Finch nodded, but didn't look at him. He was watching the tide instead. The dead man lay on his side on the concrete floor, jacket pulled tight around him as though he'd curled inward against the cold. No blood, no obvious injuries. His face was pale, lips tinged blue. Not unusual for a seaside winter, Finch knew. Exposure was the obvious answer. Too obvious. How long's this place been closed? Finch asked. Couple of years. More maybe. Alarm. Disconnected. Finch stepped inside. The air was damp and smelled faintly of rust and old seawater. The walls were lined with painted scenes of coral reefs and cartoon sharks, their colors dulled to near gray. A speaker somewhere in the ceiling clicked softly as if it wanted to remember how music used to work. He crouched near the body, careful not to touch. The man was in his 40s, maybe early 50s. Well-fed once, now thinning. Clean-shaven. Shoes worn but polished recently. Fingernails clean. Someone who had made an effort to be presentable, even at the end. Name? Finch asked. Martin Hale, the constable said. Local. Where he was. Left years back. Came home last week. Finch finally looked up. Came home. Booked a room at the Anchor's Rest. Paid cash. Finch glanced back at the body, then at the walls. People didn't die where they felt welcome. They died where they were trying to disappear. The coroner arrived shortly after, breath fogging in the cold as she bent to examine the body. Finch watched her hands carefully. No sign of violence, she said after a moment. But it's early. Hypothermia? The constable asked hopefully. Possibly, she said, but I want a full post. Finch stood and moved toward the entrance, scanning the floor as he went. Near the door, half hidden behind a rusted turnstile, he saw something that didn't belong. A matchbook. He crouched again, lifting it carefully with gloved fingers. The cover was plain white, but the name stamped inside was unmistakable. The Anchor's Rest. You said he paid cash, Finch said quietly. Yes, sir. Anyone see him leave? No. Finch closed the matchbook and handed it to an evidence officer. Outside, the wind picked up. The tide was beginning its slow return, creeping back toward the shore with a patience Finch had learned to respect. He walked farther down the pier alone, past the sealed doors of the wax museum, past a row of claw machines frozen mid-grab, stuffed animals eternally out of reach. The place had been built to distract people from reality. Now it did the opposite. Every empty space reminded you of time passing, of promises made and forgotten. A cafe at the end of the pier was still open, one of the few businesses stubborn enough to survive the off-season. Finch stepped inside and ordered tea. The woman behind the counter recognized him immediately. Police? She said. Yes. She sighed. It was only a matter of time. Hale? Finch asked. She nodded. Shouldn't have come back. Why's that? She hesitated, then poured the tea harder than necessary. Some things don't forgive, she said. Finch took his cup and found a seat by the window. Outside, the sea climbed higher, swallowing the beach inch by inch. Did you know him? Finch asked. Knew of him. Everyone did. He left after, well, after things. What things? She met his eyes finally. Asked the ones who stayed. Finch finished his tea and stood. As he stepped back onto the pier, his gaze drifted inland, toward the row of narrow streets and boarded goose houses that clung to the town like memories that refused to loosen their grip. Somewhere among them, he knew, without knowing how, his daughter had walked recently. Not because she loved the place, because she needed something from it. Finch adjusted his hat and turned back toward the body, the wind pressing against him as if urging him forward. The sea had started to come in, and with it the past. Cold Return continues with Part 2, Those Who Stayed. By midday, the fog had thinned but not lifted. It clung to the town like a habit, something no one had bothered to break. Finch drove slowly along the seafront road, past rows of goose houses with their curtains permanently drawn, paint blistered by decades of salt and neglect. The town had been built for visitors. Now it existed for memory. The Anchor's Rest stood on a side street just off the promenade, a squat, tired building with a sign that swung even when there was no wind. Finch parked and sat for a moment, engine idling, watching a man across the street struggle to unlock a shop that no longer advertised anything. People came back to places like this for one of two reasons, Finch thought: regret or unfinished business. Inside, the hotel smelled faintly of bleach and damp carpet. The desk bell rang hollowly when Finch pressed it. A woman appeared from the back, late 50s, hair pulled tight, eyes sharper than the room deserved. "Yes," she said. "Police," Finch replied, flashing his warrant card. Her mouth flattened. "I thought as much." "Martin Hale," Finch said. "He stayed here last night." She nodded once. "Room 4. Did he leave?" "Not that I saw." "What time did you last see him?" "Just after 9. He came in, asked about the heating. I told him it worked when it felt like it. And, and he smiled like it didn't matter." That detail stayed with Finch. Did anyone visit him? She hesitated long enough to be meaningful. "No." "Did anyone call?" "No." "Did he say why he come back?" Her eyes flicked to the window, then back. "People don't come back here to sightsee." Finch let that sit. Who did he see while he was here? The woman sighed, the sound of someone who had been holding it in for years. "Ask around," she said. Everyone saw him. Room 4 was small, tidy, and cold. The bed was made. No suitcase, just a worn overnight bag on the chair. Inside, spare socks, a book of tide tables, and a folded piece of paper with an address written on it. Finch pocketed the address. Outside, the town moved slowly, as though reluctant to draw attention to itself. Finch walked rather than drove, letting the streets show him what they wanted. He passed a bookmaker's shop that hadn't taken a bet in years, a fish and chip place with a hand-painted closed sign that looked permanent. He stopped at a pub halfway up the hill, the North Star. It smelled of old wood and resentment. The man behind the bar recognized Finch immediately. "Didn't take long," he said. "For what?" "For him to end up dead." "Why?" Finch asked. The man wiped the bar with unnecessary force. "Because this town doesn't forgive." "Forgive what?" "That depends on who you ask." Finch waited. The barman leaned closer. "Hale left after a girl went missing. 20 years back." "What girl?" "Local. 17. Smart. Quiet." "What happened to her?" "She was found in the water. Accident." The barman snorted. "That's what they said." "And Hale? He was the last one seen with her." Finch felt the room shift subtly around him. Conversations lowered. Glasses stopped clinking. "Was he charged?" "No." "Why not?" "No proof. And he left before anyone could find any." Finch nodded. "And now he's back. Now he's dead." Finch stepped outside, the wind sharp against his face. He walked uphill, following the address from the folded paper. The house stood alone at the edge of town, overlooking the water. Curtains drawn, garden untended. He knocked. No answer. He was turning away when the door opened a fraction. A woman stood behind it, older than Finch had expected. Her hair was gray now, but her eyes were unmistakable, hard, alert, full of something that had never been allowed to heal. "Yes," she said. "Detective Inspector Finch," he replied. "I wanted to ask you about Martin Hale." Her grip tightened on the door. "He's dead." "Yes." A long pause. "Come in," she said. The house was immaculate. Too much so. Finch recognized the effort it took to maintain control over everything when one thing had gone wrong long ago. He came to see me, she said once they were seated. Apologize. For what? For leaving? For what happened to the girl? She shook her head slowly. No. For not staying to be hated. You didn't believe he was responsible? I believed he knew more than he said. Did he say why he came back now? She hesitated. He said someone had been asking questions. Who? She wouldn't give a name. Finch's pulse ticked up. The woman studied him carefully. Young, dark hair, sharp eyes. Didn't belong here. Finch said nothing, but something in his chest tightened painfully. Did she mention Martin Hale? She asked about the girl. About what people remembered. And you told her? I told her the truth. What was that? That the town decided what it needed to believe. Finch stood as he left, his thoughts loud now. Outside, he took out his notebook and wrote one word. Sarah. He didn't know how she was connected yet, or if the woman was even talking about her. But he knew his daughter's shadow when it crossed his path. She had a habit of walking into places Finch had never resolved. Back at the pier, the tide was high now, slapping hard against the pylons. Finch stood where the body had been found. The concrete was still dark with moisture. Hale had come back to settle something. Someone had decided to settle him instead. And somewhere between those two facts was the truth, buried under silence, salt, and the collective agreement of people who had stayed too long. Finch adjusted his hat and turned back toward town. The past had come home, and it wasn't finished yet. Cold Return continues with Part 3, The Shape of Silence. The post-mortem report arrived just after dawn. Finch stood by the window of the small borrowed office at the local station, reading it twice while the sea worked steadily against the shore outside. The room smelled of stale tea and old paper. It was a place where time waited rather than passed. Cause of death, respiratory failure. Contributing factors, exposure, exhaustion. Noted anomalies, elevated sedatives in the bloodstream. Finch closed the file. Martin Hale hadn't simply lain down and died. Someone had helped him reach that state. He folded the report and slid it into his coat. Outside, the town was waking reluctantly, shutters creaking open, delivery vans stopping where they always had. Finch walked without urgency, letting the place pretend it was ordinary. He stopped at the pier again. The cleaner who'd found the body was there, bucket beside her, scrubbing at nothing in particular. Finch approached quietly. You found him, Finch said. She nodded. Didn't scream or nothing. Didn't seem right. Why not? He looked placed. Placed how? Like someone wanted him to rest. Finch glanced at the water beneath the pier. The tide was easing out again, dragging itself away. Did you see anyone here last night? Finch asked. She hesitated. I saw lights. Where? Inside Neptune's kingdom. Late. That place doesn't have power. I know. Who was there? She shook her head. Couldn't see faces. But it wasn't just one. Finch thanked her and walked inland, his thoughts pacing ahead of him now. Sedatives meant intention. Lights meant planning. More than one person meant something else entirely. He stopped at the chemist's shop, one of the few still open year-round. Inside, the pharmacist stiffened when Finch introduced himself. Any unusual purchases recently? Finch asked. Like what? Strong sedatives. Prescription only. The man hesitated. There was a prescription filled 2 days ago. For whom? Martin Hale. Finch felt the answer settle like a stone. Who brought it in? A woman. Description followed. Young, dark hair, confident walk. Finch thanked him and stepped outside into the thin sunlight. The town was beginning to look back at him now. He could feel it. At the station, Finch met with the local sergeant, a man old enough to remember the girl who drowned. You never solved that case, Finch said. No, you didn't try very hard. The sergeant bristled. We tried enough. No, Finch said quietly. You tried what the town would allow. Silence filled the room. Who was the girl? Finch asked. Emily Ward. Family. Father died years back. Mother left. Anyone else? The sergeant sighed. A younger sister. Finch felt it click into place. Not cleanly, but clearly enough to hurt. The address Finch had taken from Hale's room led him to a narrow street near the cliffs. The house there was lived in, but careful. The woman who answered the door didn't bother pretending surprise. "You're looking for me?" she said. "Yes. I'm Anna Ward." Finch nodded. "Your sister was Emily." She didn't correct him. She just stepped aside. Inside, the house was warm, cluttered with books and old photographs. Anna Ward sat opposite Finch, hand steady. "Did you meet Martin Hale?" Finch asked. "Yes." "Did you give him sedatives?" She didn't answer immediately. Then, "I gave him something to sleep." "Why?" "Because he hadn't slept properly in 20 years." "Did you intend to kill him?" "No." "Did you know others would be there?" She looked at him sharply. "Others?" Finch leaned forward. "This wasn't just you." Anna exhaled slowly. "No." She told him then about the meetings, the quiet understanding, the shared decision. How Hale had come back to confess. How the town had decided it didn't want confession. Only balance. He was ready to walk into the sea, she said. "We stopped him and left him instead. He chose the place." Finch stood. "Who else?" he asked. She met his eyes. Everyone who remembered. Outside, the wind had risen. Finch stood on the cliff path, staring out at the gray expanse of water. Somewhere in the town, his daughter had asked the right questions, and the town had answered in the only way it knew how. Collectively, quietly, permanently. Finch pulled his coat tighter and turned back toward the streets. Justice, he knew, didn't always look like justice. Sometimes it looked like agreement, and sometimes agreement was the most dangerous thing of all. Cold Return continues with Part 4, a line the sea won't cross. By the fourth day, the town had decided it had given Finch enough time. The change was subtle at first. Doors that had once opened after a knock now took longer. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Eyes followed him, not with fear, but with something colder. Expectation. Finch stood outside the station, watching the tide charts pinned to the notice board flutter in the breeze. The sergeant approached, hands in his pockets. "You're stirring things up," the sergeant said. "I'm investigating a death. You're reopening an old wound." "They usually are." The sergeant sighed. "You're not from here." "No," Finch said, "which is why I'm not pretending." Inside the station, Finch reviewed what he had: sedatives obtained legally, administered illegally, a body placed deliberately, a collective silence so practiced it had become reflex. He could charge Anna Ward, perhaps. He could try to identify others. But he knew what would happen. Testimonies would blur. Memories would fade. The town would fracture only long enough to reseal itself. Justice required more than truth. It required witnesses. Finch closed the file. He walked back toward the cliffs as evening fell, the sky bruising purple and gray. Halfway there, he saw her. She stood near the railings, overlooking the sea, coat too light for the wind, hair pulled back carelessly. She didn't turn when he stopped behind her. "You shouldn't be here," Finch said. Sarah turned slowly. She looked thinner than he remembered. Sharper, like someone who had learned to expect disappointment and plan around it. "You shouldn't be pretending I'm not," she replied. Silence stretched between them, the sea filling it easily. "You were asking questions," Finch said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because no one else was." "That's not true." She smiled without warmth. "You didn't come here until someone died." Finch absorbed that. "You spoke to Anna Ward," he said. "Yes." "And the pharmacist." "Yes." "You crossed lines." She faced him fully now. So did they. The wind tugged at Finch's coat. He watched a wave break hard against the rocks below. "You're too close to this," he said. "I'm exactly far enough away," she replied. "I don't belong to this town. Neither do you. That doesn't make you immune." "No," she said softly. "It makes me useful." They stood like that, father and daughter, aligned only by the view. "They didn't mean to kill him," Sarah said. "I know. They meant to stop him from walking away again." "I know. And you're deciding whether that matters." Finch didn't answer. Later that night, Finch met Anna Ward again, this time with the sergeant present. The room was crowded now, heavy with unspoken agreements. "You understand," the sergeant said, "why this goes no further." Finch looked around. "You decided that." "We all did." "And the law?" The sergeant spread his hands. "The law wasn't here 20 years ago." Anna met Finch's eyes. "We didn't seek revenge." "No," Finch said. "You sought equilibrium." She nodded. "Yes." Finch stood. "Equilibrium isn't justice." No, she agreed. But it's what we have. Outside, night fell quickly. Finch walked alone along the promenade, lights flickering on reluctantly. The pier loomed ahead, a skeleton against the dark. Sarah waited near his car. You're leaving? She said. Yes. And you're not charging anyone? No. She studied him. Why? Because the truth doesn't always survive the telling. That sounds like an excuse. Sometimes it is. She folded her arms. So, what happens now? Finch hesitated. I filed my report. Exposure. Complicated by sedatives. No suspects identified. And the girl who died 20 years ago. That case stays where it is. Sarah looked away. You're protecting them. I'm acknowledging them. Same thing to the dead. Finch opened the car door. You asked the right questions, and you're giving the wrong answers. He paused. You think this ends things? She didn't respond immediately. I think this town thinks it does. Finch nodded once. The sea was louder now, restless under the moon. Finch drove away as the town retreated behind him, lights shrinking, secrets settling back into place. At the edge of town, he stopped the car and sat with the engine off, listening to the waves. Justice, he knew, wasn't always a verdict. Sometimes it was knowing when the cost of truth would be paid by the wrong people. And sometimes, rarely, it was knowing you would be judged for that decision by the one person whose opinion still mattered. Finch started the engine. The sea kept its counsel. So would he. Cold Return continues with Part 5, What the Tide Leaves Behind. Finch did not leave the town that night. He told himself it was practical. Paperwork, loose ends, the long drive back better attempted in daylight. But the truth settled heavier than that. He stayed because leaving felt like something too final, too much like acceptance. He took a room at the Anchor's Rest. The woman behind the desk raised an eyebrow when he asked for the key. Room 4's been cleaned, she said. I'll take it, Finch replied. She hesitated, then slid the key across the counter without another word. The room smelled faintly of bleach and cold air. Finch stood just inside the door, hat still on, coat still buttoned, as though the walls might reject him if he committed too fully. He sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the buildings settle around him. Pipes clicking, distant footsteps, the sea murmuring somewhere beyond the walls. He slept badly. In the early hours, Finch dreamed of the pier, not as it was, but as it had been. Lights blazing, laughter spilling out into the night. The sea an afterthought rather than a presence. When he woke, it was still dark, the sound of waves more insistent now, as though the water were trying to reach him. He rose before dawn and walked back toward the cliffs. The town was quiet in a way that felt deliberate. Windows dark, doors shut. Even the gulls seemed subdued, perched along the railings like sentries rather than scavengers. At the cliff's edge, Finch found Anna Ward already there. She did not turn when she heard his footsteps. You're still here, she said. Yes. For what? Finch joined her at the railing. The sea below was restless, whitecaps breaking against the rocks with a dull, repetitive force. I wanted to understand what comes next, Finch said. Anna nodded slowly. So did I. They stood in silence for a long moment. You didn't report us, she said finally. No. You could still change your mind. Yes. But you won't. Finch watched the water churn. No. Anna exhaled, a sound caught between relief and something darker. You think that makes you complicit. I think it makes me responsible. She studied him sideways. That's worse. Sometimes, Finch said, worse is the honest option. Anna folded her arms against the cold. You think Martin Hale deserved what happened? No. Then why let it stand? Finch chose his words carefully. Because the town has already sentenced itself. She frowned. That's not how justice works. It's how consequences do. Below them, the sea surged, then fell back again, as though testing the limits of the land. He came back to tell the truth, Anna said quietly. Yes. And we didn't want to hear it. No. She closed her eyes briefly. Then what do we live with now? Finch didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was low. The knowledge that silence is never neutral. Anna nodded once. That may be enough. Finch left her there and walked back into town. By mid-morning, the atmosphere had shifted again. Finch noticed it in the way shopkeepers avoided his eyes, In the way people stepped aside, not out of respect, but caution. The town was recalibrating, absorbing the shock, settling back into itself. At the cafe at the end of the pier, the woman who'd spoken to him before poured his tea without being asked. "They say you're leaving," she said. "Soon." She glanced toward the water. "You'll take this with you?" "Yes." She hesitated. "That girl you asked about, the one from years ago, Emily Ward?" "Yes." She wasn't alone that night. Finch looked up. "Who was with her?" The woman shook her head. "Doesn't matter now. It mattered then." "Then it mattered too much," she replied. "That's why nothing happened." Finch paid and left, the words settling heavily. By the time he reached the promenade, Sarah was waiting. She stood with her hands in her coat pockets, hair loose now, eyes fixed on the horizon. "You stayed," she said. "Yes. That's new." Finch stopped beside her. "I didn't want to leave unfinished things." She laughed softly. "You're very selective about what you finish." He accepted that without comment. "They're already closing ranks again," she said. "You can feel it." "Yes. And you're letting them." "I'm acknowledging limits." "Whose?" "Mine." She turned to him sharply. "That's convenient." Finch met her gaze. "It's honest." She studied him for a long moment. "You taught me that truth mattered. I still believe that." "Then why does it matter less here?" "It doesn't," Finch said. "It just costs more." Sarah looked away, jaw tightening. "You think you're protecting people," she said. "I think I'm preventing harm." "To whom?" "To everyone who would be destroyed by a truth that arrives too late to fix anything." She folded her arms. "That's not justice." "No," Finch agreed. "It's triage." Sarah shook her head. "You always do this." "Do what?" "Choose the least visible damage." Finch didn't respond. "You know what this town learned?" she continued. "That they can decide when the law applies. They already believed that. And you confirmed it." Finch let the words land. "Perhaps." She turned away. "I didn't come here for you." "I know. I came because I needed to understand what happens when no one intervenes." And she paused. "I learned that intervention isn't always loud." Finch watched her closely. "You're not done with this." "No, neither am I." She looked at him again, something unreadable passing between them. "They'll remember this," she said. "The town. So will I. I expect nothing less." She stepped back. "I'll be in touch." Finch nodded, not asking how or when. That evening, Finch filed his report. It was precise, careful, honest in the way only omissions can be. Cause of death, exposure, complicated by sedatives. Circumstances, unclear. Conclusion, no further action recommended. He signed it with steady hand. As night fell, Finch returned to the pier one last time. The lights of Neptune's kingdom were dark again. The place looked exactly as it had before Hale returned, as though nothing had happened at all. Finch knew better. The sea moved endlessly beneath him, carrying away what it could, leaving the rest behind. Some truths drowned, others waited. Finch adjusted his hat and turned back toward the road. He would carry this with him. So would the town. Cold Return continues with. Part 6. The water keeps its own time. Finch left the town at dawn. Not because he was finished, but because staying any longer would have turned reflection into indulgence. The road out wound along the coast for a while, the sea keeping pace with him, gray and impenetrable. He drove with the window cracked just enough to let the salt air sting his face. A reminder that what had happened was real, that it would not be filed away neatly once he returned to London. He stopped once, just beyond the town limits, where the road narrowed and the land fell away toward the water. Finch stepped out of the car and stood for a moment, hands resting on the roof, watching the tide withdraw. It left behind darkened sand, scattered debris, the occasional object that had not meant to surface. That, Finch thought, was the nature of truth. It emerged when it chose to. Back in London, the city felt louder than he remembered. The station platform echoed with voices and movement, a jarring contrast to the careful quiet of the coast. Finch welcomed it. Noise was easier to bear than consensus. At his desk, Finch finalized his report. No changes, no revisions. The words sat on the page exactly as he had left them, technically accurate, morally incomplete. He closed the file. A younger detective paused near his desk. "Heard about the Seaside case," he said. Finch looked up. "You heard wrong." The detective nodded and moved on. That afternoon, Finch received a call from the coroner. The toxicology report had been amended. Nothing that changed the outcome, but enough to confirm what Finch already knew. Sedatives had been administered carefully. Dosage controlled. Not reckless. Not panicked. Intentional restraint. Finch hung up and sat back, rubbing his eyes. There were crimes that demanded pursuit. Others that demanded acknowledgement. This one demanded restraint, the hardest thing he knew. That evening, Finch walked home instead of taking the bus. His flat greeted him with its familiar austerity. Armchair, table, heater humming faintly, lava lamp glowing softly in the corner like a memory that refused to fade. He hung his coat carefully over the chair, placed his hat on the table, and stood still for a moment, listening to the quiet. The quiet here was different. It wasn't enforced. It was chosen. He poured himself a drink and sat. Sarah did not call. He had not expected her to. 2 days later, Finch received a letter. No return address. The paper smelled faintly of sea air. Inside was a single sentence, written carefully. "Thank you for letting it end." Finch folded the letter and placed it in a drawer he rarely opened. He thought of Anna Ward standing at the cliff's edge, of the town's agreement passing unspoken from one person to the next like an inheritance no one wanted, but everyone accepted. He wondered what would happen the next time someone returned seeking absolution. He suspected the town already knew the answer. Later that week, Finch crossed paths with Sarah again, unexpectedly, at a cafe near King's Cross. She was seated by the window, notebook open, pen idle in her hand. She saw him at the same moment he saw her. Neither smiled. "You look like London suits you again," she said. "It reminds me what friction feels like," Finch replied. She closed the notebook. "I spoke to someone from the town." Finch didn't ask who. "They're not proud," she said. "But they're not sorry either." Finch nodded. "That's usually how it goes." She studied him. "You still think you did the right thing." "I think I did the least wrong thing." She considered that. "You taught me once that compromise was how people convinced themselves they were decent." "Yes. And now?" "And now I think decency sometimes survives only through compromise." She shook her head slightly, not in anger, but disappointment. "You've gotten very good at living with unresolved endings." Finch met her gaze. "I learned from experience." She stood. So did I. They stood there a moment longer, the city moving around them without interest. "I'll be around," she said finally. "I know." She left without looking back. Finch remained seated, watching her disappear into the crowd. He felt no sense of loss, only recognition. The distance between them was no longer accidental. It had shape now, meaning. Weeks later, Finch received a final update from the coastal station. No further incidents. No reopened cases. Neptune's kingdom had been boarded up more securely. The pier remained open. Life, as it always did, had continued. On a Sunday morning, Finch took a walk along the Thames. The river moved steadily, indifferent to him, carrying its secrets toward the sea. He stopped at the railing and rested his hands on the cold metal, watching debris drift past, twigs, leaves, things once anchored somewhere else. The sea, Finch knew, kept its own time. It did not judge. It did not absolve. It only remembered. Martin Hale had returned seeking release. The town had returned him to the water without granting it. Finch had returned to London, carrying a truth that could not be spoken without harm. Some endings, Finch reflected, were not meant to close. They were meant to endure. He turned away from the river and walked back into the city, trench coat collar turned up, hat pulled low. Not hiding, not retreating, simply moving forward with the weight of what he now knew. The past had come home. It always did, and it never left quietly.